When my daughter got married, I kept silent about the truth. My late husband had left me $80 million in beachfront villas along the Carolina coast. I said nothing, and I am grateful for that silence because only a week later, my new son-in-law walked into my kitchen with a lawyer by his side, thinking they could take it all from me. That is how my story begins. The day started with my daughter's wedding, a grand reception held in one of Charleston's old ballrooms, all chandeliers and polished wood floors. Everyone dressed in their finest. The music soft, the laughter louder. When I walked into the room, holding the corsage I had pinned to my own dress, I noticed immediately where they had placed me. Table 14 near the emergency exit, hidden behind a tall column of white orchids. I sat down quietly, smoothed the folds of my dress, and watched my daughter Vanessa enter the room in her gown. She was radiant. She was mine. Yet I was placed like an afterthought, barely visible in the photographs that would later be shared. It wasn't an accident. Families don't make accidents like that. From my table half obscured, I smiled anyway. I clapped when others clapped. I raised my glass when the toast was given. Inside, though, something fractured. I thought of all the years I had stood beside her bed when she was feverish. Of the nights I had graded papers by her crib's dim light when I was still teaching elementary school. Invisible. That was the role I was given in her new life. And so I stayed silent. I did not speak of the villas her father Thomas had built with his life's labor. He had called them the houses of wind and salt. 20 years of construction contracts, storm repairs, and sweat poured into a chain of properties stretching from Myrtle Beach down toward Hilton Head. Each deed carried his name, and before he died, he transferred them into a trust with my name at the center. I can still see him in those final days. His hand, large calloused from decades of work, gripping mine with surprising strength. His voice low, urgent, almost pleading. "Eleanor," he said, "don't tell anyone. Don't sign anything. One day you'll understand why." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. Now I do. A week after the wedding, I heard a knock on my front door. I opened it to find Nathan, my brand new son-in-law, standing there in a pressed shirt, a smile too polished to be genuine. Beside him stood a stranger, a man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. A lawyer. "Mother," Nathan began with a tone that was too smooth to belong to family. "We thought we'd stop by to help you with some important paperwork, just to make sure you're safe now that you're living alone." They followed me into the kitchen. I placed my teacup on the table, the steam still curling upward. The lawyer slid a thick folder across the wood. On the cover, bold black letters, "Durable Power of Attorney." Nathan smiled again, resting his hand lightly on the folder. "It's just a formality. Vanessa and I want to make sure you're cared for, that nothing ever goes wrong with the villas, the bank accounts, well, everything Thomas left behind." My spoon slipped against the side of my cup with a soft metallic chime. The sound was small, yet it rang inside me like a bell. That sound told me the truth. They weren't here to protect me. They were here to strip me of the very thing Thomas had worked to preserve. I looked at the folder. I looked at Nathan. I said nothing. Silence once again became my armor. And that is where the real story begins. I should tell you who I am so you understand the woman who sat in that kitchen with a lawyer's folder pushed across her table. My name is Eleanor Blackwell. I am 67 years old. For most of my life, I was an elementary school teacher in Charleston, South Carolina. I taught children how to read their first sentences, how to count apples on a page, how to stand up in front of the class and say their names clearly. Patience was my profession. Dignity was my compass. Now I live alone in a modest two-story house, painted the pale blue that Thomas once called sea glass. The shutters are white, though the paint has begun to peel at the edges. Out front, I tend a small garden where roses climb a trellis Thomas built for me years ago. The roses are stubborn. Even when storms lash at them, they return in spring with a fragrance that reminds me of the vows we made when we were young. Inside my house, everything has its place. The kettle sits on the stove, polished from years of use. A row of teacups hangs neatly above the sink. On the shelf in the hallway rests a small metal box, my husband's old safe scuffed from moving it between job sites in his construction days. In that safe are not only deeds and documents, but pieces of our history. Photographs with curled edges, letters Thomas wrote when he traveled for work, the birth certificate of our only child. It is more than a container for paper. It is the vault of our life. I carry the key to that safe in the pocket of my cardigan. always. It is brass heavy for its size, warm from my body heat. Sometimes when I am nervous, I close my hand around it, as if I am holding Thomas's hand again. That key is not just metal, it is reassurance. Every morning I make tea before the sun has fully risen. I set 2 cups on the table out of habit, though I drink from only one. Steam curls upwards, soft and silent. The empty cup is not for a guest who will arrive. It is for the memory of Thomas, who sat across from me for 42 years, who reached for my hand even in silence. The ritual anchors me. It reminds me that even though I am alone in this house, I am not without presence. Thomas was a builder in every sense of the word, not just of houses, but of stability of dreams. He started with small contracts, deck repairs, roof replacements, before moving on to larger projects along the coast. He had a vision to create homes that stood against the wind and salt, places where families could gather without fear of the next storm. Wind and salt, he used to say, are the true test of any wall. He would run his hand along the beams, nodding as if he could already hear the ocean challenging his work. Over 2 decades, he built a chain of beachfront villas. They were not hotels. They were not glossy vacation rentals. They were homes, each one solid-rooted, tested by hurricanes and repaired by his own hands. He called them the houses of wind and salt, and he loved them almost as if they were children of his labor. When he became sick, the work slowed. His body could no longer bear the weight of lumber or the sting of ocean air, but his mind remained sharp, and his concern was not for himself but for me. I remember the night he placed the trust documents into the safe. His face was pale, his breath shallow, yet his eyes held the same determination I had seen on scaffolding 30 years before. "Eleanor," he said, gripping my hand so hard I felt his pulse in my palm, "promise me this. Don't tell anyone what I've left you. Don't sign anything, not a single page, not until you have to. These villas, they're more than money. They are the proof of what we built together." I nodded, though tears blurred my vision. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Vanessa, our daughter, had always been close to me, and I believed she would never let anyone treat me with anything but respect. Thomas must have sensed something I did not. After his funeral, the house felt cavernous, though the walls were the same. The roses bloomed anyway. The kettle still whistled, and the safe tucked into the hallway seemed heavier than ever. I carried the key in my pocket from that day forward, unable to part with it. It was not only a key to documents worth $80 million in property, it was a key to my dignity, my independence, my future. Sometimes late at night I would sit at the table, the brass key in one hand, my teacup in the other, and whisper into the empty air, "I hear you, Thomas. I won't sign. I won't let go." And yet, even with his words echoing in me, nothing prepared me for how quickly the test would come. A wedding where I was hidden behind orchids. A week later, a knock on the door. A lawyer's folder sliding across my kitchen table, my spoon striking the cup like a bell. That was the moment I realized the houses of wind and salt were not just Thomas's legacy. They were also my armor. The morning after the folder hit my table, I heard the soft knock I always recognize. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps. I opened the door to find Sophia on my porch with a warm pan wrapped in a dish towel. The scent of butter and corn rose like a small mercy. "I brought cornbread," she said, stepping past me as if she were returning a book. "And I brought eyes. Something happened here. Sophia is my neighbor 2 houses down, a widow like me. She lost her husband Frank 10 winters ago. She keeps her hair short and her sentences shorter. She sets the pan on my counter, scans the room, and notices the teacup, the second empty cup. The folder now tucked beneath a placemat, as if paper could be shamed into behaving. She does not ask permission. She lifts the placemat and reads the bold type durable power of attorney. Her jaw does not drop. She only exhales through her nose the way a carpenter checks a warped board. "Who brought this?" she says, not a question. "Nathan," I answer with a lawyer. She nods once a verdict without the gavel. I saw them leave. The suit carried himself like he owned your house. We sit at the kitchen table. I pour tea. Sophia refuses milk. I cut the cornbread and watch the steam rise. The smell makes the room feel less like a courtroom and more like a kitchen again. She takes a bite, points with the corner of the slice. "Say it out loud, Eleanor." "They want me to sign," I say. "They say it is for my safety." Sophia chews slowly. She is building time for me to find my footing. She sets the bread down and wipes her fingers on the towel. Don't let silence become shackles. Turn it into armor. The line lands where my spine begins. I feel myself straighten. Armor, I repeat. She taps the folder. A signature like that is a door that only swings one way. Ask me how I know. So I do. Sophia tells me about the spring after Frank died, about a nephew who called every Sunday with a voice like honey. He said the word protection so many times it started to sound like a hymn. He brought a notary and a bouquet to her porch on the same afternoon. When she hesitated, he laughed and told the notary to give them a minute. The laughter did not belong in a living room. She did not sign. He did not call again. That silence, she says, hurt, but it healed. The other kind, the kind where you sign to make the room quiet, that wound doesn't close. I take the brass key from my cardigan pocket and turn it in my palm. Sophia sees it, but she always sees what I try to hide. She nods at the safe in the hallway. Thomas left you more than paper, she says. He left you a way to stand. I look at the roses through the window. The trellis he built with leftover cedar still holds. I hear the lawyer's words. Safeguards. Efficiency. Today, I hear Thomas's words, do not sign. My chest tightens, not with fear, but with clarity. Nathan called me mother. I say the word thin on my tongue, as if the word itself were a key. Sophia snorts a dry sound. People love the word family when they need a shortcut to your life. Keys belong to owners, not visitors. We eat in a plain rhythm. Slice, sip, breathe. Sophia asks for the facts the way a nurse checks vitals. Who drafted the document? Who benefits? Who holds the pen when the pen shakes? She listens without interrupting. When I pause, she gives me a list. It sounds like a grocery run, which calms me. Here is what you do today, she says. You call William Brooks, the man your Thomas trusted. You make a rule and you write it down. No documents without counsel. Drafts in advance, meetings scheduled by your attorney. Put the rule on a card near your door. If they call you difficult, call it measured. I smile, small and grateful. Sophia has a way of turning fear into verbs. She stands and walks to the shelf with the safe. She does not touch it. She only looks at it with respect, as if the safe were a person who had earned it. People think strength is volume, she says. It is paperwork and boundaries repeated calmly. I think of Vanessa, her wedding veil moving like a pale river, her eyes avoiding mine when the photographer arranged the mothers. I taste the cornbread turned to salt in my mouth. If I do this, I may lose her, I say. You may, Sophia answers. She does not decorate the truth. Or you may teach her the one lesson that lasts. Love without boundaries becomes theater. She will learn where love actually stands. We carry our cups to the porch. The morning is bright, the streets still quiet. The roses throw shadows shaped like lace. Sophia leans on the rail. You know what else makes armor, she says. Other women who have done this before you. She tells me about the church group that meets on Tuesdays. Widows and grandmothers who trade notes on fraud alerts and voice passwords. On how to freeze credit and thaw it. On how to ask for a second opinion without apologizing. I laugh once. The sound surprises me. A classroom for the retired, I say. A classroom for the underestimated, she corrects, smiling. You taught children to stand and say their names. Now you will teach yourself to do it again. We fall into an easy quiet, the kind that holds rather than presses. A breeze comes off the water. Tang of salt. Hint of sunscreen from someone's open window. Sophia looks at my hands. They no longer tremble. She puts a folded paper on the table, a phone number, written in her neat block letters. Call William by noon, she says. If your voice shakes, call me first. I will stand in the room while you dial. I reach for her hand. It is warm, dry, steady. Thank you, I say. She squeezes once. A seal without ink. If they come again, she says, and you do not want to open the door, call me. I will walk over with my coffee. 2 women on a porch are a stronger door than oak. We return to the kitchen. I wipe the counter, put the cornbread in a tin slide, the folder back into the light. Sophia watches me write on an index card in clear, slow letters. I do not sign documents presented without counsel. All meetings through attorney William Brooks. Drafts 48 hours in advance. I tape the card beside the door. The tape crackles a small, satisfying sound. Sophia nods the kind of nod that closes a chapter and opens a plan. She picks up her coat. At the threshold, she turns. "Armor on Eleanor," she says. "Let them find a woman, not a signature." After she leaves, I stand at the sink and let the water run cold. I touch the key. I touch the card. I touch the safe. The house feels taller by an inch. I dry my hands on the dish towel and reach for the phone. William will answer on the second ring. He always does. By noon that day, after Sophia left me with her firm words and her folded paper of phone numbers, I called William Brooks. Thomas had trusted him for years. He was not flashy. His office was a converted brick townhouse near the courthouse. His suits were rumpled by late afternoon, but he was steady, and steady was what I needed. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and certain. "Eleanor," he said, "I've been expecting your call." I froze for a moment. "Expecting?" "Thomas told me you would need me," William replied. "He made me promise that if your name ever came up in my voicemail, I would drop everything and come." True to his word, he was at my door an hour later. He carried a leather briefcase scratched at the edges thick with files. His presence filled the kitchen without noise. He set the case on the table and looked at me over his glasses. "Show me what they brought." I slid the folder across to him. He flipped through the pages, nodding as if he had already seen this play, staged a dozen times. "Durable power of attorney," he muttered. "Broad language, immediate effect, no safeguards." He closed the folder with a sharp clap. "They want access to everything without condition." My stomach turned. I clutched at the brass key in my pocket, felt its cold bite. "Thomas told me not to sign. He said I would understand one day." William leaned forward. His eyes softened, but his voice carried weight. "He was right, Eleanor. What Thomas left you is not just money. It is not just property. It is a fortress. He built these villas like he built his houses, layer by layer reinforced against the storm. The trust he set up is more than a legal form. It is his wall of stone around you." "A fortress," I repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, this is not a treasure to be plundered. This is a citadel to stand in. He designed it so that no one, no child, no in-law, no stranger in a suit, can take it without your consent and without the law agreeing. But fortresses need maintenance. That is where we begin." He opened his case and drew out forms neatly clipped. "We will record the deeds again at the county office to refresh them in your name. We will freeze your credit with the 3 bureaus so no one can open accounts against your identity. We will establish a healthcare directive naming Sophia as your proxy before Vanessa so no one can use illness to argue incapacity. And we will set up a standing rule with your bank. No transactions without your personal signature verified in person." I listened as though he were teaching me a new subject. As I once taught children how to read, letters formed into words. Words formed into a shield. Each measure he described was a brick laid into Thomas's wall. "Will it be enough?" I asked. William smiled, a brief curve. "Enough and more. By the time we are done, you will not only hold the fortress, you will know every gate and key by heart." He placed the first form in front of me. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted the pen. I thought of Nathan's smooth voice calling me mother. I thought of Vanessa's downcast eyes. I thought of Thomas's last grip. I pressed the pen down. The line of my name looked like a bridge between what I had been and what I was becoming. William stamped the form with a notary seal he carried. The red ink sank into the paper with a dry, final sound. Thud. That sound did not echo like defeat. It rang like a drum, steady and protective. We moved through the documents one by one. Directive deed bank authorization. Each signature was a breath I had been holding for weeks. Each stamp another thud in rhythm, as if Thomas himself were knocking from beyond to say, "Yes, this is the way." At one point I paused, pen hovering. What if Vanessa hates me for this? What if she believes Nathan's words over mine? William looked directly at me. Then she learns the trust slowly. Paperwork is not emotion. It is boundary. Love can return, but a fortress once breached does not rebuild so easily. You are protecting her too, whether she knows it yet or not. Tears stung my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I pressed my name onto the final page firm and unshaken. William stamped again. Thud. When we finished, the table was covered in signed papers, small stacks forming a new architecture of safety. William gathered them with care, slipping them back into his case. "I will file these first thing in the morning," he said. "By this time next week, no stranger will stand a chance." I exhaled long and heavy as though I had carried a weight across decades. For the first time since Thomas's funeral, I felt not only his absence, but his presence woven into the paper, the ink, the seal. William Rose shook my hand and left with a quiet promise. "Call me before you ever open the door to them again." When the door closed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The late afternoon sun stretched across the floor. Catching the brass key still in my pocket, I drew it out, turned it in my palm, and for the first time it felt less like a reminder of loss and more like a piece of armor. I touched the key to the folder now stamped and signed. The house around me seemed taller, sturdier, as if Thomas's walls had risen again. I had entered this day reactive, shaken, nearly cornered. Now, with each thud of the seal still echoing in my ears, I felt the shift inside me. I was no longer the woman at the back of the wedding, hidden by orchids. I was the woman holding the fortress, and I knew I was ready for the storm. It was only 3 days after William left my kitchen with the signed papers when I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. I glanced out the window. Vanessa stepped out first, smoothing the skirt of her dress, her eyes darting toward the roses along my porch as if they could explain her nervousness. Behind her came Nathan, his hand lightly resting at her back, guiding her toward the door, with the confidence of someone who believed the ground belonged to him. I did not rush to greet them. I let them ring the bell twice, then opened the door slowly. The air between us was heavy with politeness, that brittle kind of politeness that cracks under its own weight. "Mother," Nathan said, smiling the way a salesman does when he rehearses in the mirror, "we thought we'd stop by to check on you. We worry, with you being alone in this house. Vanessa insisted we come." Vanessa's eyes flickered at his words. She nodded, but the movement was small, almost reluctant. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. They settled at the kitchen table where Thomas and I had spent decades sharing tea. I placed cups before them, though only Vanessa touched hers. Nathan spread his hands wide over the wood, as if claiming it for himself. "You've had so much responsibility on your shoulders," he began. "The villas, the maintenance, the taxes. Vanessa and I just want to lighten your load. We want to take care of you." Vanessa reached across the table, brushing her fingers against mine. "It's true, Mom. We lie awake sometimes thinking about you here. What if something happens and no one is around? You shouldn't have to carry all this by yourself." Their voices overlapped like waves, steady and insistent words dressed in the clothes of concern. But beneath I heard the calculation. Nathan's cadence was too smooth. Vanessa's phrases too polished, as though rehearsed in the car ride over. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I stirred my tea, the spoon clicking against the porcelain in an even rhythm. Silence stretched, not awkward, but deliberate, like the pause between two movements of a symphony. Inside, I thought I hear them the way one hears wind against a window. Persistent, insistent, but never touching the core of the house. Their words rattled, but they did not enter. Nathan leaned closer. "Imagine, Mother, how much simpler life could be if we handled the details. You could travel, join clubs, spend time with friends, leave the business side to us." I met his eyes then, calm and unblinking. My silence unsettled him. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, and tried again. "It isn't about money. It's about family." He said the word like it was a key that would open any door. I kept my lips closed, my gaze steady. Vanessa squeezed my hand gently, her eyes softening. "Please, Mom, we only want what's best for you." Still, I remained quiet. I let the weight of my silence fill the room until Nathan finally leaned back, frustration flickering behind his smile. Vanessa withdrew her hand, folding it in her lap. I lifted my cup and sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. Then I sat it down and said only one sentence, my voice even. "I'll think about it." Not a promise, not a concession, only words to end the performance. They exchanged glances. Vanessa's full of hope, Nathan's shadowed by impatience. He rose first, pulling Vanessa with him. "We'll check back soon," he said. His tone suggested inevitability, as though my walls were already crumbling. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet, my shoulders relaxed, my breath released. I walked to the safe in the hallway, ran my fingers over the cool metal, the key in my pocket pressed against my thigh. Reassuring solid, I whispered to the empty air, perhaps to Thomas, perhaps to myself. They speak of care, but it is control they crave. They speak of family, but it is possession they mean. The roses outside swayed in the breeze, their stems unbroken. I thought of Sophia's words, silence is armor. I had worn that armor today, not with anger, not with shouting, but with stillness. And though they left without victory, I knew this was not the end. Family tides pull harder than strangers. The undercurrent had begun. The next morning brought a face I had not seen in years. A knock at the door, but not Nathan's impatient rap, but 3 measured taps. When I opened it, I found myself looking at Henry Thomas's younger brother, the ocean in his eyes and the creases around them deeper than I remembered. "Eleanor," he said, his voice weathered but warm, "I hope I'm not intruding." I stepped back from the doorway, making room for him to enter. Henry had always moved with the same quiet confidence as Thomas, but gentler, somehow less forged by labor. He entered my home with his hat in his hands, a gesture from another era. "It's been too long," I said, leading him to the kitchen. The kettle was already on the stove. Henry settled at the table, watching as I set out cups and saucers. Unlike Nathan, he did not try to own the space. He simply inhabited it with respect. "I came as soon as I heard about the wedding," he said. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there. The fishing season up north kept me tied to the docks." He paused, studying my face. "But that's not why I'm here now." I poured the tea, steam curling between us like a question mark. "You've heard something." He nodded slowly. "Thomas always said you could read minds." His smile was brief but genuine. "Word travels in small circles, Eleanor. I heard Nathan has been asking questions about the villas, about the trust, about who holds the keys." The brass key in my pocket seemed heavier suddenly. I wrapped my fingers around my cup, letting its warmth center me. "You don't seem surprised," Henry observed. "I'm not," I replied. "They've already been here with papers, durable power of attorney." Henry's eyebrows drew together. "Ah, so it's begun." He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "Eleanor, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Thomas made it clear the villas are yours now, and I respect that completely. But I want you to know that I'm here, not just passing through. I've taken a rental down at Myrtle for the season." "The season," I echoed. Henry had spent the last 15 years moving between fishing grounds, Alaska in summer, Maine in winter, rarely staying in one place long enough to call it home. "I've been thinking it's time to drop anchor," he said simply. "Maybe do some consulting for the boats instead of sailing on them. And maybe," he hesitated, "maybe be the kind of brother Thomas would have expected me to be." I felt something shift in me. Not doubt, not relief, but a recognition. Henry was offering alliance, not control, support, not supervision. "Thomas left me a fortress," I said, using William's word. Henry nodded. "He always built to withstand storms, but even the strongest walls need a sentry now and then." We drank our tea in comfortable silence, a rhythm established decades ago during family gatherings and holidays before our lives diverged. Henry had been there when Thomas laid the foundation for the first villa. He had helped carry beams and raise walls before the sea called him away. "Have you told Vanessa about the trust?" he asked finally. "About what Thomas really left?" I shook my head. "Thomas asked me not to tell anyone, and now after seeing Nathan's approach, I understand why." Henry's gaze moved to the window, to the roses on their trellis. "Thomas was always the one who could see weather coming before the rest of us. He knew which way the wind would shift." He turned back to me. "But Vanessa is caught in the middle now. She's Thomas's daughter too." "I know," I said softly. "That's what makes this so difficult." "What will you do?" I touched the pocket where the key rested. "Stand, like Thomas asked me to, like Sophia reminded me I could." Henry smiled, a flash of Thomas in his eyes. "Sophia from 2 doors down, still making cornbread that could save a soul." "The very same." He nodded approvingly. "Good allies matter in a siege." He set his cup down gently. "Eleanor, I'm not here to fight your battles, but I want you to know that if you need me for anything, I'm just down the coast. Sometimes it helps to have someone who remembers the beginning of the story, not just the middle." As he rose to leave, I felt a question pressing against my ribs. "Henry, did Thomas ever mention to you why he was so concerned about the villas? About me signing anything?" Henry paused at the door, his hat back in his hands. Not directly, but the last time I saw him about a month before he passed, he said something that stuck with me. He said, "The horizon isn't always where you think it is." I didn't understand it then. And now I wonder if he saw something on Nathan's horizon long before the rest of us. After Henry left, I sat alone in the kitchen, the second cup still holding the memory of presence. Another ally, unexpected, but welcome. The fortress had gained a century. That afternoon, I called William. "I need to understand the villas better," I told him. "Not just as property, but as Thomas's vision. What did he really build?" William's voice carried a note of approval. "I was hoping you'd ask. The papers only tell half the story. The walls tell the rest." He promised to bring the full history of the properties to our next meeting. Not just deeds and values, but the story of each building, each decision, each storm weathered and overcome. The true legacy Thomas had left me wasn't just financial security. It was a testament to his life's philosophy written in cedar and pine, and foundations dug deep in roofs angled to shed the hurricane winds. 20 properties stretching down the coast, each with a purpose beyond profit. That night, I dreamt of Thomas standing on the shore pointing down the coastline. In my dream, he kept saying, "Look at the horizon, Eleanor. See what's really there, not what they tell you is there." I woke before dawn, my hand already reaching for the empty side of the bed. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of waves. I made tea as usual, setting out 2 cups. But something had shifted in me overnight. The second cup wasn't just for memory now, it was for strength borrowed from those who would stand with me. Thomas, who built the fortress. Sophia, who reminded me how to wear silence as armor. Henry, who offered alliance without demands. William, who helped me maintain the walls. And perhaps someday Vanessa, when she learned to see the horizon as it truly was, not as Nathan painted it for her. I touched the brass key in my pocket and felt something I had almost forgotten. Not just grief or determination, but a quiet, steely pride. Thomas had trusted me with his life's work because he believed I was strong enough to protect it. Not just from strangers, but from family who forgot what family truly meant. The sun rose over the Atlantic, painting the kitchen in gold. I stood at the window, watching the light touch the roses, making them glow like small flames. The trellis Thomas built held them upright, guiding without constraining. Boundaries, I thought, the framework that allows growth to find its shape. I felt ready for whatever storm might come next. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I drove to the grocery store on Meeting Street. The list in my pocket was ordinary. Bread, milk, tea bags, roses, if they had them fresh. The kind of list that makes life feel steady. I parked near the back where the shade from an oak tree stretched across the asphalt. The air smelled of salt and exhaust, the mix of coastal wind and city traffic. I had just locked my car when I heard a familiar voice. Nathan. His voice was lower than usual, sharp at the edges, carrying urgency instead of polish. Rather than ducking behind a cart or hurrying away, I paused deliberately. He stood several rows over in the parking lot, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear, unaware of my presence. I remained still, listening, not out of malice, but out of necessity. "Yes, Dad, I know," Nathan was saying, his words cutting the air. "I've already tried the bank. They won't extend us anymore, not with what the numbers are showing." There was a pause as his father spoke on the other end. "I'm telling you, if Eleanor signs the power of attorney, we'll have access. We can refinance the villas, sell 2 or 3 quickly. That will clear the debt, keep the company afloat. Without that, we're sunk. It's over." The world seemed to tilt under me. Bread and milk vanished from my mind. All that remained was the sound of his desperation, the calculation hidden beneath his false concern. He turned, slightly pacing. "Yes, I know it's risky, but we don't have a choice. The creditors are circling. If Eleanor doesn't sign, Dad, we lose everything. Do you hear me? Everything." His voice cracked on the last word, raw and unpracticed. Nothing like the calm charm he had laid across my kitchen table. But there was something else in what he said, something that made me frown. "Dad, not Mom." Nathan had been talking to his father, not his mother, as I'd initially assumed, and his father was clearly involved in whatever scheme they were planning. I stepped back, moving quietly toward the store entrance. I didn't need to hear more. What I'd learned was enough. Nathan's company was in trouble, serious trouble, and he saw my villas as his salvation. But there was another layer here one Thomas might have seen coming. Nathan's father. What connection did he have to all of this? Inside the store, I moved through the aisles, mechanically placing items in my cart without really seeing them. My mind was piecing together a larger picture. Nathan's insistence, his smooth sales pitch, his urgency, they weren't just the acts of an opportunistic son-in-law. They were the moves of a desperate businessman with backers of his own, backers who stood to lose as much as he did. I paid for my groceries and drove home, my hands steady on the wheel despite the churning in my mind. When I reached my house, I did not immediately go inside. I sat in the car looking at the porch where Thomas and I had spent so many evenings watching the tide change. "You saw this coming," I whispered to his memory. "You knew someone would try to use me to get to the villas. But why? What made you so certain?" There was no answer except the gentle creak of the porch swing in the breeze. That evening, I called William. When he answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Nathan's company is in financial trouble," I said. "He's desperate for access to the villas. He was talking to his father about it today. I need to know, did Thomas ever mention Nathan's father to you? Any connection there?" William was silent for a long moment. "Not directly," he finally said. "But about 6 months before he passed, Thomas asked me to look into the background of a development company called Coastal Horizon. It was owned by a man named Victor Reynolds. Does that name mean anything to you?" I frowned. "No, should it? Maybe not, but I think we should find out if there's any connection between Victor Reynolds and Nathan's family." Thomas was concerned about Coastal Horizon for some reason. He never told me why, but he was adamant about protecting the villas from any outside interference after he was gone. "I'll ask Henry," I said. "He might know something." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, watching the steam rise from both cups. The second one, as always, remained untouched. But tonight it seemed to be waiting for answers rather than memories. I called Henry the next morning. His voice was clear against the backdrop of seagulls and fishing boats. "Victor Reynolds," he repeated after I explained. "Yeah, I know the name. He tried to buy Thomas out maybe 10 years ago. Wanted to turn the whole stretch of beach into some kind of luxury resort complex. Thomas wouldn't sell, and apparently Reynolds didn't take kindly to being refused. Made some threats, though nothing came of them directly." "And Nathan's father? Any connection there?" Henry was quiet for a moment. "I don't know Nathan's family well enough to say. What's his last name again?" "Lockwood. Nathan Lockwood." I heard Henry inhale sharply. "Eleanor Reynolds' daughter married a Lockwood a while back. I remember because Thomas mentioned it once. Said something about keeping your enemies closer than your friends." The pieces clicked into place with a cold clarity. Nathan hadn't just happened to meet and fall in love with Vanessa. He had targeted her as a way into our family, as a path to the villas his father-in-law had failed to acquire directly. "Does Vanessa know?" Henry asked gently. "I don't think so," I said, remembering her eyes at the wedding, bright with what she believed was love. "She's a pawn in this, just as I was meant to be." "What will you do?" I thought of Thomas's warning, of William's fortress, of Sophia's armor. "Stand," I said simply, "and make sure Vanessa sees the truth with her own eyes, not through Nathan's lens." After I hung up, I sat quietly, letting the revelations settle into my bones. Thomas hadn't just been cautious, he had been prescient. He had seen the long game that Reynolds was playing through his son-in-law, and he had prepared me for it as best he could. I opened the safe and removed the trust documents, spreading them on the table. For the first time, I read every word, not just for legal meaning, but for Thomas's intent. The language was clear. The villas could not be sold without unanimous agreement from a board of trustees that included me, William, and a third party I hadn't previously noted, Henry. Thomas had built a three-lock system. Even if I were to sign a power of attorney, Nathan would still need to convince both William and Henry to agree to any sale. The fortress was more secure than I had realized, but that didn't mean Nathan wouldn't try other tactics. If financial pressure and smooth persuasion didn't work, what would be next? I thought of what Sophia had said about armor, about how silence could protect. I thought of the women at church who had faced similar battles and prevailed. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing Sophia's number. "I need to meet your Tuesday group," I said when she answered. "I think the storm is bigger than I realized." Sophia didn't ask for explanations. 2 o'clock, I'll pick you up." The church fellowship hall smelled like coffee and powdered sugar. Folding tables wore plastic cloths printed with faded lemons. Children chased each other between chairs, while the choir director stacked hymnals in a neat tower. Sophia hooked her arm through mine and steered me toward a round table near the bulletin board. "Sit," she said. "Listen." Three women made space without ceremony. Ruth wore a blue scarf and a smile that curved only when necessary. Evelyn had sturdy shoes and a small diamond that flashed when she lifted her paper cup. Altha kept a notebook with lined pages and a pen that clicked like a metronome. Sophia introduced them with the clean efficiency of someone setting a table. Ruth raised 3 boys and a mortgage. Evelyn buried 2 husbands in one bad investment. Altha saved half the church from signing what they should not. I folded my hands around a styrofoam cup. Steam rose. The coffee was too strong and exactly right. Ruth began, her voice low and even. "After my Harold died, my oldest came with a binder, tabs, and highlights. Looked like care. He said he wanted to take the load. He wanted to consolidate accounts, streamline, modernize. He used all the verbs that make a mother feel small. I said no. He did not visit for 6 months. He visits now. He brings pie. He learned that no did not mean I stopped loving him." Evelyn nodded, turning her cup so the seam faced the wall. "My niece showed up with a notary and a bouquet. Wanted me to sign a deed transfer so she could pre-manage the house. I put the pen down and baked a cake instead. She called me cold. I called it clear. We speak again. We do not sign again." Altha clicked her pen twice, then opened her notebook. "I keep lists," she said, as if confessing to a harmless vice. "When people are grieving, paper becomes wind. It blows where it wants. Lists give it weight. Freeze credit with all 3 bureaus. Add a voice password at the bank. Put a card on the door that reads, 'No documents accepted without counsel.' Drafts 48 hours in advance. Keep a call log. Date, time, exact words. Logs win when memories get shiny." Sophia squeezed my arm, once a silent chorus beneath the spoken one. I felt the brass key in my cardigan pocket and the ghost of the red notary thud inside my chest. I told them about the parking lot, about Nathan's voice stripped of polish, about the word old said like a strategy, about the connection to Victor Reynolds that Thomas had foreseen. Their faces did not change. Only their attention leaned forward. Ruth spoke first. "Desperation wears good shoes," she said. "It knocks like family and says please. It stands very close and smells like cologne." Evelyn blew on her coffee. "People call it duty when they want your signature. I have learned to hear the difference between worry and appetite." Altha tapped her pen against the notebook. 2 soft beats. "What did you say to your daughter?" "I haven't told her yet," I admitted. "I'm afraid she won't believe me, that she'll think I'm trying to come between them." Ruth leaned in, her scarf brushed the table. "Saying no is not fighting your child," she said. "Saying no is how you stay their mother. Children cannot lean on air." The room swelled with the small noises of Sunday. Spoons touching plates, the piano bench, scraping the floor, a baby hiccuping, and then sighing. I looked at these women and felt my shoulders lower by an inch. The loneliness that had draped itself over me since the wedding shifted. Not gone, but shared. Evelyn broke a sugar cookie in half and set the larger piece on my napkin. "We are not here to make you braver," she said. "You already are. We are here so the wind has more bodies to push against." Altha slid a photocopy from her notebook. It was a single page printed in a plain font. At the top, a heading, "Practical Comforts." Under it, lines that would look like nothing to anyone who had never weathered this kind of storm. Freeze credit, TransUnion Equifax Experian, confirmed by mail, banknote in person only, dual employee verification voice password, healthcare proxy, primary you trust to say no when you cannot, secondary for backup, door card, no documents without counsel, drafts 48 hours in advance, call log date, exact words, no summaries, threshold rule, you do not decide at the door, you decide at the table after tea. I traced the last line with my finger. Threshold rule. It felt like something Thomas would have said while measuring a beam. Simple, strong. Ruth tilted her head. "You are a teacher," she said. "Teach your daughter what a boundary looks like in daylight. Invited her to watch you pay a bill, to see the ledger, to hold a wrench while you tighten something. Let her see that you are not refusing help. You are refusing surrender. The words settled where grief had kept its chair. A different weight took its place, steadier, inhabitable. I breathed slow and deep. Alta closed her notebook and handed me a little stack of blank index cards. For your door, your log, your pocket, she said. Write clean. Tape corners. Watch how differently people speak when they see a rule. On our way out, the bell rang noon. Sun pooled on the church steps. The air smelled faintly of lilies left from a funeral earlier in the week. Margaret took my hand and squeezed. Ruth waved her scarf. Evelyn pointed at my cardigan pocket, where the key made a small square. Alta tapped her notebook against her hip like a drum. At the bottom of the steps, I paused. Threshold again. I looked back into the hall where the table still held crumbs and paper cups and the imprint of our elbows. The chorus of wisdom had not been loud. It had been precise. And in that precision, I found a kind of peace I had not felt since Thomas pressed the safe key into my palm. As we crossed the parking lot, I felt the key's weight and the lightness of company. Both truths could live in one body. I said the sentence aloud. First to myself, then to Sophia. Saying no is not against them. It is how I keep me. Good, she said. Now go home and tape it to your door. The text arrived on a Wednesday evening just as I was trimming the roses near the porch. The phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my apron and read the screen. It was from Nathan. Friday will bring a notary over. Just formalities. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. For a long moment I stood there in the fading light, the scent of roses thick around me, the brass key pressing against my hip through the fabric. Formalities. That word clanged in my head like a dull bell. Thomas's voice rose in memory. Do not sign. And Sophia's warning echoed. Don't let silence be shackles. Make it armor. I walked into the kitchen, placed the phone on the counter, and brewed a pot of tea. Steam curled upward, slow and calm. I set 2 cups out as I always did. Then I typed my reply. Deliberate. Every word a stone placed in a wall. Please contact Attorney William Brooks. All meetings and documents must go through him. I pressed send. No explanation, no apology, a full stop at the end. My hands did not tremble. The next 2 days were quiet but not empty. A current ran beneath the silence, tense and expectant, like air before a thunderstorm. On Friday afternoon, the storm arrived. At 300 sharp tires crunched on my gravel drive. I watched through the lace curtain as Nathan stepped out, phone in hand, his face tight. He did not bring a notary. He brought his temper. The knock rattled the door hard enough to shake the frame. I walked down the hallway slowly, each step measured. I stopped on my side of the threshold, my hand resting lightly on the doorknob, but not turning it. Mother. His voice was sharp, stripped of charm. Why are you making this difficult? We're just trying to protect you. The brass key in my pocket grew warmer with each pound of his fist against the wood. I stayed silent. Silence, I reminded myself, is not weakness. Silence is choice. The knocking grew louder. Open the door. This is ridiculous. Do you know how much trouble you're causing Vanessa's upset? The company's hanging by a thread and you're playing stubborn. Do you want us ruined? Is that what you want? My heart thudded, but I did not move. I let his words slam against the door the way wind slams against shutters. Noise, pressure, force. But the house still stood inside me. An inner dialogue rose. If I open this door even a crack, I let him perform his script again. If I remain here behind the line Thomas built the fortress holds. I finally spoke, my voice clear, carrying through the door, but not raised. Nathan, as I said in my message, please contact William Brooks. All documents, all meetings go through him, not me. Silence followed for a breath, broken only by his ragged exhale. Then came the pounding, again louder, furious. You think a lawyer will save you. You're old Eleanor. You don't understand how the world works. Without us, you'll drown in paperwork. Do you want to end up alone, broke, confused? I pressed my back lightly against the door, steadying myself. I am not confused, I said, calm, each word clipped. This conversation is over. The handle jerked once, twice, as though he might try to force it. My pulse leapt, but the lock held, and so did I. Finally, his steps retreated down the porch. A car door slammed. The engine roared and faded down the street. I stayed there for a long while, hand on the knob, forehead leaning against the wood. I felt the line between us, the literal threshold of the door, more powerfully than any courtroom or contract could declare. On one side, desperation clawed at me. On the other, silence kept me whole. I whispered into the stillness, half to Thomas, half to myself. The line is drawn, and I chose not to cross it. When I finally stepped back, the room looked unchanged. The rug in its place, the table with 2 cups, waiting the roses bending outside the window. But inside me, everything had shifted. I had stood behind the line and not moved. I walked into the kitchen, poured the tea that had cooled and took a sip. It was bitter now, but strong. I carried the second cup to the window and set it down gently, the steam already gone, but the ritual intact. In that moment, I understood the motif of the door, the threshold. Each time I chose not to step out, each time I stayed firm on my side, I was not just refusing entry. I was affirming presence, my house, my voice, my dignity. Later that night, a text buzzed again. Only 3 words from Nathan. "We'll be back." I placed the phone face down on the counter, the brass key pressed into my palm as I slid it into my pocket. The fortress stood, and so did I. The next morning, William called. His voice carried the steady calm I had come to rely on. "Eleanor, I've received some interesting information you should know about. Nathan has been making inquiries at the county office about the villa deeds." "What kind of inquiries?" I asked, feeling the key in my pocket like a talisman. "He's been looking for weaknesses in the trust structure. Any villas that might have been left out, any properties Thomas might have held separately. He's been thorough." "And did he find anything?" William chuckled softly. "Thomas was more thorough. Every property is securely in the trust. But there's something else, Eleanor. I did some digging into Nathan's business affairs as you asked. His construction company, Lockwood Development, is indeed in serious financial trouble." "How serious?" "They've overextended on a major resort project down in Florida. Cost overruns, permit issues, possible environmental violations. They're facing multiple lawsuits, and the bank is threatening to call in their loans. They need capital, and they need it quickly." I thought of Nathan's desperate voice in the parking lot. "We're sunk. It's over." "And the connection to Victor Reynolds?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting," William said. "Reynolds isn't just Nathan's father-in-law. Records show that Coastal Horizon Reynolds' company is a silent partner in Lockwood Development. They've been financially entangled for years, well before Nathan ever met Vanessa." The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about a son-in-law seeing an opportunity. This was a calculated plan, years in the making. Reynolds had failed to buy Thomas out directly, so he found another way in, through my daughter. "William," I said quietly, "I need to tell Vanessa about this, but I don't know if she'll believe me." "Be careful," he warned. "If Nathan suspects you're onto their plan, they might escalate. Reynolds has a reputation for playing hardball." After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window watching the roses sway in the breeze. Each petal, each leaf part of something Thomas had cultivated with patience. Just like the villas, just like our life together. I thought of Vanessa, her face at the wedding radiant and in love. Or what she believed was love. The pain of disillusionment would be crushing, but the alternative, letting her remain a pawn in Reynolds' game, was worse. My phone rang again. "Henry." "Eleanor, I've been asking around about Reynolds and Nathan," he said without preamble. "There's something else you should know. The resort project that's failing, it's on land directly adjacent to your southernmost villa, the one at Hilton Head." "Seaglass Cottage," I said. Thomas had named each villa personally. Seaglass had been the last one he built before his illness, a stunning 3-story home with wraparound porches and windows designed to capture both sunrise and sunset. Exactly. If Reynolds and Nathan could get control of Seaglass, they could expand their resort footprint. The combined properties would be worth far more than either one alone. "So this isn't just about quick cash," I murmured. "It's about Thomas's legacy becoming part of Reynolds' empire." "It looks that way," Henry confirmed. "Eleanor, you need to be very careful. People like Reynolds don't give up easily when there are millions at stake." After we hung up, I made tea with hands that weren't quite steady. The brass key seemed heavier in my pocket. Thomas hadn't just been protecting me from opportunists. He'd been protecting his life's work from a specific threat, a man who had already tried to take it once and failed. I opened the safe and took out a file I hadn't looked at closely before. Inside were photographs of each villa taken by Thomas himself. I spread them on the table, 20 properties stretching down the coast like pearls on a string. The first Sandpiper Haven, where Thomas had proposed to me on the deck just as the sun was setting. The tiny cottage had grown over the years as Thomas added rooms and porches, turning it into a graceful retreat for families. The fourth, Blue Heron Point, where Vanessa had taken her first steps across the wide pine floors, her laughter echoing off the high ceilings. The 12th Storm Watch, built after Hurricane Hugo with reinforced walls and hurricane windows, a testament to Thomas's determination to create homes that would last through any tempest. And finally, Sea Glass Cottage, his last creation. I remembered the day he'd finished it, how he'd stood on the beach with his arm around me, tired but triumphant. "This one's special, Eleanor," he'd said. "It's got the best of everything I've learned. The strongest foundation, the smartest design, the most beautiful view. Someday when I'm gone, you come here when you need to remember what matters." I had nodded, not wanting to think about a time when he wouldn't be beside me. But now I understood. Each villa was more than property. Each was a chapter in our story, a piece of the legacy he wanted to protect. And the key to it all sat in my pocket, warm from my body heat. Thomas hadn't just left me buildings. He'd left me our history, our memories, physical spaces where our life together had unfolded. No wonder he'd been so adamant. No wonder he'd created a fortress to protect it all. I gathered the photographs, carefully returning them to the safe. Then I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in weeks. I called Vanessa. "Mom." Her voice was cautious, guarded. "Is everything okay?" "I'd like to see you," I said simply. "Just you. There's something important we need to discuss." Silence stretched between us. "Then is this about Nathan and the power of attorney?" "Because he said no," I interrupted gently. "This is about your father, about what he really built, about why it matters." Another pause. "When?" "Tomorrow. Come for tea." After she agreed and hung up, I looked at the roses through the window. They needed pruning again, the old growth making way for new buds. Sometimes cutting back was an act of preservation, not destruction. I hoped Vanessa would understand that when she heard what I had to say. The morning Vanessa was due to arrive, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been fitful, my mind churning with the weight of what I needed to tell my daughter. I made tea as usual, 2 cups on the table, and watched the sunrise paint the kitchen in soft gold. When the doorbell rang at 10, I took a deep breath and touched the brass key in my pocket before opening the door. Vanessa stood on the porch alone, her face composed but her eyes uncertain. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She followed me to the kitchen, glancing around as if seeing the house for the first time. Perhaps she was. When we look through someone else's lens long enough, the familiar becomes strange. I poured tea into both cups. The ritual calmed me. "You said this was about Dad." She began, her fingers curling around her cup. "Yes," I said, "but it's also about Nathan and his father-in-law, Victor Reynolds." Her eyebrows drew together. "Victor? What does he have to do with anything?" "More than you might think," I replied gently. "Vanessa, before I explain, I want you to know that I understand how much you love Nathan. What I'm about to tell you isn't meant to hurt you or come between you. It's about the truth your father tried to protect." She tensed visibly. "What truth?" I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. 10 years ago, a man named Victor Reynolds tried to buy all of your father's beachfront properties. He wanted to turn them into a luxury resort complex. Your father refused. The villas were never just business to him. They were a legacy he wanted to preserve. Vanessa frowned. "I remember Dad mentioning someone who wanted to buy him out, but I didn't know it was Victor." "Reynolds didn't take the rejection well," I continued. "He made threats, though nothing came of them directly. But your father remained cautious. That's why when he became ill, he placed all the villas in a special trust with strict conditions. He was protecting them from being sold or consolidated into exactly the kind of development Reynolds wanted." Her cup clattered against the saucer. "Mom, what are you saying, that Victor is still trying to get Dad's properties through Nathan?" I reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Vanessa Nathan's company, Lockwood Development, is in serious financial trouble. They're partners with Coastal Horizon, Victor Reynolds' company. They have been for years, since before you met Nathan. The color drained from her face. That's, that's just a coincidence. Nathan never mentioned the resort project that's failing and causing Nathan's financial problems. I continued softly. It's right next to Sea Glass Cottage. If they had control of that property, they could expand the resort and potentially save the project. Vanessa pulled her hand away. No, Nathan wouldn't. He loves me. He wouldn't marry me just to get to Dad's properties. I didn't argue. Instead, I stood and walked to the hallway, returning with the safe. I set it on the table between us and used the brass key to open it. Your father left detailed records, I said, removing a folder. William has verified everything. The connection between Nathan's company and Reynolds goes back years. The timing of when Nathan first approached you, it lines up with when Lockwood Development began having problems with the resort project. Vanessa stared at the papers I laid before her. Financial records, company registrations, property maps, showing the proximity of the failing resort to Sea Glass Cottage. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them. I don't want to believe this, she whispered. I know, I said, and I wish I didn't have to tell you, but your father saw this coming somehow. That's why his last words to me were so urgent. Don't sign anything. Don't tell anyone what I've left you. He was trying to protect not just me, but you too. He didn't want you to be used as a means to get to the villas. Tears welled in her eyes. How can I know this is true? What if you're just trying to keep control of everything? Instead of answering, I pulled out the photographs of the villas and laid them one by one on the table. These aren't just properties, Vanessa. This is Sandpiper Haven, where your father proposed to me. This is Blue Heron Point, where you took your first steps. This is Stormwatch, built after Hurricane Hugo nearly destroyed half the coast. And this, I said, placing the final photograph before her, is Sea Glass Cottage, the last villa your father built before he became ill. He put everything he knew, everything he believed in, into these buildings. They're not just assets to be liquidated. They're our history. Vanessa picked up the photograph of Blue Heron Point, her finger tracing the wide porch where she had played as a child. I remember this place, she said softly. The blue shutters, the swing on the porch, the way the light came through the windows in the morning. Her voice broke. Dad used to carry me on his shoulders down to the beach. Yes, I said, and he built each place with the same care, the same attention to detail. Not just so they would stand against storms, but so they would hold memories, our memories. She set the photograph down and looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer now. What should I do if what you're saying about Nathan is true? That's not for me to decide, I said, but I think you should look into this yourself. Don't take my word for it. Ask questions. Pay attention to what Nathan doesn't say as much as what he does. And remember that your father loved you enough to try to protect you from this, even when he knew he wouldn't be here. She nodded slowly, gathering herself. I need time to think, to process all this. Of course, I said, the truth doesn't disappear if we take our time facing it. After she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the tea cold in both cups. I had opened the door that Thomas had tried to keep closed, the knowledge of betrayal, the pain of disillusionment, but I had also opened the way to understanding, to seeing clearly what had been hidden. I hoped that in time, Vanessa would find her way back to the truth of who she was separate from Nathan's influence, that she would reclaim her own story just as I was reclaiming mine. The brass key sat on the table beside the photographs. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. Thomas had built a fortress to protect what mattered. Now I had shown Vanessa the walls, the foundations, the reason for its existence. The rest would be up to her. 3 days passed with no word from Vanessa. The silence was different now, expectant rather than oppressive. I tended the roses, made tea, carried the brass key. Life continued in its ordinary rhythms, but underneath I felt the current of change. William called daily with updates. Nathan had been making more inquiries, becoming increasingly frustrated when blocked at every turn. The credit freezes, the bank alerts, the legal notifications. All were holding firm. The fortress was doing its job. On the 4th day, as I was pruning the last of the summer roses, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, his silver hair catching the light. Even before he turned toward the house, I knew who he was. Victor Reynolds had finally decided to enter the game directly. I didn't wait for him to knock. I stepped onto the porch, pruning shears still in hand, and watched him approach. His smile was practiced, confident, the smile of a man used to getting his way. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Victor Reynolds. I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced." I didn't take his hand. "I do mind, Mr. Reynolds. I'm not in the habit of entertaining unexpected visitors, especially those with a history of threatening my late husband." His smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at finding me less pliable than anticipated. "Ancient history," he said, waving dismissively. "Thomas and I had our professional differences, but that's water under the bridge now. I've come to make you an offer that might interest you." "I'm not selling the villas, Mr. Reynolds. Not one of them. Not now, not ever." He chuckled as if I'd made a charming joke. "Everyone has a price, Mrs. Blackwell. Even Thomas knew that. He just set his too high. I'm prepared to be much more generous with you." "This isn't about price," I said. "It's about legacy, about respecting my husband's wishes, about preserving what he built instead of demolishing it for profit." Reynolds' smile thinned. "Noble sentiments, but sentiment doesn't pay property taxes or maintenance costs. 20 luxury villas require significant upkeep. Are you prepared for that burden? A woman in your position." The careful pause before position carried all his assumptions about me. Old, alone, incapable. I thought of Ruth's words, "Desperation wears good shoes. It knocks like family and says please." "My position is quite secure," I replied it evenly, "as is my resolve. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have roses to tend." I turned to go back inside, but his next words stopped me. "What about Vanessa's position? Have you considered what my offer could mean for her future?" I turned slowly. "Are you threatening my daughter, Mr. Reynolds?" His hand spread in a gesture of innocence. "Threatening, not at all. I'm simply pointing out that Nathan's financial difficulties affect her too. Their marriage is young. Financial strain can be challenging for newlyweds." "A strain your company helped create," I said, "as Nathan's silent partner in the failing resort project." Again, that flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected me to know about his business connections. "You've done your homework," he acknowledged. "Then you know that accepting my offer would solve many problems at once. You'd be free of the burden of these properties. Nathan and Vanessa would be financially secure. Everyone wins." "Except Thomas," I said, "and his vision for these villas. For the families who rent them year after year, creating their own memories in spaces he designed specifically for that purpose. For the coastline he protected from overdevelopment. For the legacy he wanted to preserve." Reynolds sighed his patience, visibly wearing thin. "Mrs. Blackwell, I respect your sentimentality. But business is business. My offer won't remain open indefinitely." "Neither will my door," I said, turning away once more. "Goodbye, Mr. Reynolds." This time he didn't stop me. I walked inside and closed the door firmly behind me, listening to his footsteps retreat down the path. Only when his car had pulled away did I allow myself to sink into a chair, my hands trembling slightly. The encounter had been brief, but the message clear. Reynolds wasn't giving up, and now he was willing to use Vanessa as leverage. I reached for the phone and called William, recounting the conversation. "He's getting desperate," William said. "The fact that he came in person shows how important this is to him. But don't worry, Eleanor. Legally, he has no ground to stand on. The trust is ironclad." "It's not the legal battle I'm worried about," I admitted. "It's Vanessa. He implied that her marriage would suffer if Nathan's financial problems continue." William was quiet for a moment. "Has Vanessa contacted you since your talk?" "No, I'm giving her space to process everything." "That's wise," he said. "But perhaps it's time to bring in additional support. Henry mentioned that he's been talking to some of the families who regularly rent the villas. They've expressed concern about rumors of development. They might be willing to speak up about the value of preserving Thomas's vision." "A community defense," I murmured, thinking of the women at church. "More bodies for the wind to push against." "Exactly. Thomas didn't just build houses, Eleanor. He built relationships. Those people remember him. They care about what happens to his legacy, too." After we hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the roses. They stood straight in the afternoon light, their stems strong despite the recent pruning. Thomas had taught me that cutting back wasn't weakness. It was preparation for new growth. I touched the brass key in my pocket. The fortress was holding. But now it was time to do more than defend. It was time to rally those who understood what was truly at stake. That evening, Henry called with news that sent a chill through me. Eleanor, I've just heard from a friend at the county clerk's office. Nathan has filed a petition claiming you're mentally incompetent to manage the trust. He's requesting an emergency hearing to have himself appointed as temporary conservator. My hand tightened around the phone. On what grounds? He's claiming that you've become paranoid and delusional since Thomas's death, that you're refusing reasonable financial assistance and isolating yourself. He's lined up a doctor who's willing to testify without having examined you. Anger flared hot and sharp. That's absurd. William and I have documented everything. My financial affairs are in perfect order. I know, Henry said, his voice steady, and we'll fight this. William is already preparing a response. But Eleanor, this is a serious escalation. Nathan and Reynolds are getting desperate. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen, the brass key clutched in my palm. This wasn't just about the villas anymore. This was an attempt to strip me of my autonomy, my dignity, my very self. I thought of the women at church, of Ruth and Evelyn and Altha, who had faced similar battles and prevailed. I thought of Sophia, who had told me to turn silence into armor. And I thought of Thomas, who had seen this coming somehow, who had built a fortress not just of legal documents, but of relationships, of community, of trust. I would not be defeated by false claims or legal maneuvers. I would stand just as the villas stood against wind and salt, rooted in truth and strengthened by time. The next morning brought Sophia to my door, her face tight with concern. I heard, she said simply as I let her in, Nathan's petition. It's all over church circles. News travels fast, I said, leading her to the kitchen where the kettle was already whistling. Small towns run on whispers, she replied, settling at the table. But this time the whispers are working in your favor. People are outraged, not just at church, but all through the community. Thomas was respected. No one believes you're incompetent. I poured tea, the routine steadying my hands. It's not about what people believe. It's about what a judge might rule based on manipulated evidence. Which is why you need witnesses, Sophia said firmly. People who can testify to your mental clarity, your financial competence, your daily functioning. People like me, like the Tuesday group, like the families who've rented Thomas's villas for years. I looked up sharply. How did you know about the families? Henry's been making calls, she explained. He reached out to me yesterday. We're organizing Eleanor, building a wall of witnesses that no judge can ignore. For the first time in days, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly, but recognition. I wasn't fighting alone. There's something else, Sophia added, her voice gentler now. Vanessa called me last night. She's been doing her own investigation, checking Nathan's financial records, talking to people at his company. She found proof that he approached her deliberately after meeting her at a charity event where Reynolds had pointed her out. The teacup trembled in my hand. And she's devastated but clear-eyed. She's moved out temporarily, staying with a friend while she decides what to do next. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. She'll call when she's ready. Tears pricked behind my eyes. Is she safe? Reynolds implied he might use her to pressure me. She's safe, Sophia assured me, and she's stronger than you think. Thomas's daughter through and through. I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. My daughter was finding her way back to herself, to the truth. Whatever happened with the legal battle ahead, that knowledge was a victory in itself. Sophia reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Armor up, Eleanor. The hearing is set for next week. We've got work to do. The days leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. William brought documents proving my financial competence. Henry coordinated testimonials from families who had rented the villas for years. Sophia gathered statements from church members, neighbors, former colleagues, all attesting to my mental clarity and independence. Through it all, I maintained my routines. Tending roses, making tea, carrying the brass key, simple acts that anchored me in the life Thomas and I had built together. The night before the hearing, my phone rang. Vanessa. Mom, she said, her voice steady despite a slight tremor. I want to testify tomorrow against Nathan's petition. My heart swelled. Are you sure it won't be easy facing him? I'm sure, she said firmly. I've seen the financial records, the emails between him and Victor planning this for years. I was a pawn mom. They used me to get to Dad's properties. I won't let them use me to hurt you too. What about your marriage? I asked gently. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet. That's something I'll have to figure out later. But I know which side I'm on in this fight. After we hung up, I walked onto the porch and looked at the stars scattered across the dark sky. Thomas and I used to sit here on summer nights, planning our future, dreaming of what we might build together. I whispered to his memory, to the night air, to the roses sleeping in the garden. The fortress holds Thomas, and it's not just walls and documents now, it's people, it's truth, it's our daughter finding her way home. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. I sat beside William, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. The brass key was in my pocket, its weight familiar and reassuring. Nathan and his attorney sat across the aisle. He didn't look at me, but I could see tension in every line of his body. Behind him sat Victor Reynolds, silver hair, immaculate expression unreadable. The judge, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the session to order. Nathan's attorney presented, first painting a picture of an elderly widow overwhelmed by grief, refusing help, isolating herself from family, making irrational financial decisions. The doctor, who had never examined me, testified that my behavior showed classic signs of age-related cognitive decline exacerbated by grief. He spoke with practiced concern, but his eyes never quite met mine. When William's turn came, he methodically dismantled each claim. He presented bank statements showing my impeccable financial management, medical records from my actual physician confirming my excellent cognitive health, statements from community members testifying to my active, engaged lifestyle. And now, William said, I would like to call Vanessa Lockwood to the stand. Nathan's head snapped up, eyes widening in shock as Vanessa walked forward. She hadn't told him she would be testifying. She was pale but composed, her steps steady as she took the oath and sat in the witness chair. Mrs. Lockwood, William began gently, could you please tell the court about your mother's mental state based on your personal observations? Vanessa looked directly at me, her eyes clear and determined. My mother is one of the most mentally sharp people I know. She managed our household finances throughout my childhood. She helped my father build his business, keeping the books and handling client relations. Since his death, she has maintained 20 properties in excellent condition, managed rental agreements, and preserved the legacy he wanted to create. And what about the claim that she is isolating herself from family? Vanessa's gaze shifted to Nathan, then back to the judge. That claim is false. My mother has maintained relationships with neighbors, church members, and family friends. If there has been any distance between us, it was created by my husband's attempts to gain control of my father's properties through deception. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Nathan's attorney leapt to his feet, objecting, but the judge waved him down. Please explain, Mrs. Lockwood, she said. Vanessa took a deep breath. Your Honor, I recently discovered that my husband, Nathan Lockwood, deliberately sought me out at a charity event 3 years ago at the direction of his business partner, Victor Reynolds. Their companies have been financially entangled for years. They are currently developing a resort adjacent to one of my father's most valuable properties, and they are in serious financial trouble. Nathan's petition is not about my mother's mental competence. It's about gaining control of properties worth $80 million to save their failing business. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. Nathan's face had gone white, his eyes fixed on Vanessa with a mixture of rage and disbelief. When order was restored, the judge turned to Nathan's attorney. Do you wish to cross-examine the witness? He conferred briefly with Nathan, then shook his head. No, Your Honor. The rest of the hearing unfolded like a wave gathering strength. Sophia testified to my daily functioning and clear decision-making. Henry spoke about Thomas's careful planning for the trust and his explicit instructions to protect the properties. 3 families who had rented the villas for years described conversations with me about maintenance improvements and scheduling, all demonstrating my thorough understanding of the business. When the last witness had spoken, the judge looked directly at Nathan's attorney. Counselor, based on the evidence presented, I'm inclined to dismiss this petition immediately and with prejudice. Do you wish to make any final arguments before I rule? He glanced at Nathan, then at Reynolds, whose face had hardened into a mask of controlled fury. We withdraw the petition, Your Honor, the attorney said finally. The judge nodded. Petition withdrawn. This matter is closed. She looked at me over her glasses. Mrs. Blackwell, I apologize for the stress this proceeding must have caused you. Based on the testimony today, it's abundantly clear that you are fully competent to manage your affairs and the trust your husband established. Relief washed through me, but I maintained my composure as William gathered our documents and we left the courtroom. Outside, Sophia Henry and the others who had testified waited, their faces breaking into smiles as they saw us. It's over, William said simply. But as I looked across the courthouse steps, I saw Nathan and Reynolds in heated conversation. Reynolds' face was flushed with anger as he jabbed a finger at Nathan's chest. Not quite, I murmured. They've lost this battle, but men like that don't concede the war so easily. William followed my gaze and nodded grimly. We'll be vigilant. The trust is secure, and now we have court records establishing your competence. They'll find no legal avenues forward. And Vanessa, I asked, looking for my daughter in the crowd. She left through a side door, Sophia said, appearing at my elbow. She said she needs a little time, but she'll call you tonight. I nodded, understanding. Vanessa had taken a monumental step today, testifying against her husband, acknowledging the deception that had shaped her marriage. She would need space to process that pain, to decide what came next. As we walked to the parking lot, I felt the brass key in my pocket, solid and warm. The fortress had held. Thomas's vision remained intact, and something new had emerged from the battle. A community united around preserving what he had built, what we had built together. The war might not be over, but today, dignity had prevailed over deception. The line had held, and I had not crossed it. That evening, as dusk settled over the garden, I sat on the porch with tea and watched the roses sway in the gentle breeze. The phone call with Vanessa had been brief but healing. She was staying with friends, taking time to consider her next steps. She had asked about visiting the villas, about seeing them again through new eyes, understanding their true significance. Of course, I had told her. They're your heritage, too. A car pulled into the driveway, Henry's old pickup truck. He climbed out carrying a folder and joined me on the porch, settling into the chair beside mine. I thought you might want to see these, he said, handing me the folder. I found them in Thomas's old work shed at Sandpiper Haven. I opened the folder to find blueprints, sketches, notes in Thomas's familiar handwriting, plans for the villas from the first to the last, evolving over time as his skills and vision grew. He kept everything, Henry said, every draft, every revision. I thought it might help Vanessa understand what he was building, why it mattered so much to him. I traced Thomas's handwriting with my finger, feeling closer to him than I had in months. Thank you, Henry. This means more than I can say. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. There's something else. The families who testified today, they've started organizing. They want to form a preservation association for the houses of wind and salt, to ensure that even beyond the trust, beyond legal protections, there's a community committed to maintaining Thomas's vision. Tears pricked behind my eyes. He would have loved that. It was never just about the buildings for him. It was about creating spaces where people could gather, where memories could be made. I know, Henry said softly. That's why I agreed to help coordinate the association. If you approve, of course. I looked out at the roses, at the garden Thomas and I had tended together, at the life we had built brick by brick, memory by memory. I approve, I said, and I think Thomas would too. As night fell and the stars emerged, I sat alone on the porch, the brass key in my palm, the blueprints spread beside me. The fortress had held not just because of legal documents or judicial rulings, but because of something more fundamental. The truth of what Thomas and I had built together. The integrity of standing firm when pressured to yield. The strength found in community and shared purpose, in mutual respect. I had not signed away my dignity, my autonomy, my husband's legacy. I had not crossed the line that would have erased me. Instead, I had drawn new lines, of alliance, of support, of truth. The houses of wind and salt still stood along the coast, weathering storms as they had for decades. And I still stood, too changed by grief and challenge, but undiminished. In the quiet of the evening, whispered to Thomas, to the stars, to myself, the fortress holds, and so do I. The morning after the court hearing, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. For the first time in weeks, I had slept deeply without the weight of uncertainty pressing on my chest. The judge's words echoed in my mind. It's abundantly clear that you are fully competent to manage your affairs. I rose and followed my morning ritual, kettle on the stove, 2 cups on the table, the brass key in my pocket. But something felt different. The second cup wasn't just for memory now. It felt like a placeholder for possibility, for relationships mending and strengthening. My phone rang as I was pouring the tea. Vanessa. Mom, she said, her voice clearer than it had been in months. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about the villas being my heritage too. I'd like to see them. To really see them, I mean. Not as property, but as Dad's vision. My heart expanded in my chest. I'd love that. Could we start today with Sandpiper Haven? I remember it from when I was little, but I want to see it through new eyes. We arranged to meet at noon. After I hung up, I carried my tea to the porch and watched the morning light play across the roses. Their blooms were fewer now, the season turning toward autumn, but what remained was vibrant and steadfast. I thought of Thomas, of how he would have felt knowing Vanessa was reaching back toward his legacy, toward understanding what he had built. A circle completing perhaps not perfectly, but genuinely. The brass key in my pocket felt lighter somehow, as if part of its burden had shifted, been shared. At Sandpiper Haven, I arrived first parking beneath a large pine tree that had stood sentinel for decades. The villa sat just beyond the dunes, its weathered cedar siding, the color of honey-white trim gleaming in the midday sun. Thomas had designed it to merge with the landscape, not dominate it. Low-slung roof lines, wide porches, windows positioned to capture both sunrise and sunset. I climbed the steps to the deck where Thomas had proposed to me 39 years earlier. The wood was new, replaced after a storm 5 years ago, but the view remained unchanged. Ocean stretching to the horizon, beach grass swaying in the breeze, pelicans skimming the waves. A car door closed behind me. Vanessa had arrived. I turned to watch her walk up the path, her steps hesitant at first, then more confident as she took in the familiar sight of the villa. She looked tired, shadows beneath her eyes, testifying to sleepless nights, but there was determination in her posture. "It's exactly how I remember it," she said, joining me on the deck. The blue shutters, the swing. She touched the railing, ran her fingers along the wood. "Dad rebuilt this, didn't he? After Hurricane Matthew." "Yes," I said, surprised she remembered. The deck was almost destroyed. He spent weeks restoring it, insisting on doing the work himself even though he could have hired someone. "Because it was special to him," she said softly, "because this was where you two began." I nodded, throat tight with emotion. He wanted it exactly as it had been. He said some things aren't meant to be replaced, just renewed. We stood in silence for a moment, the ocean breeze gentle around us. Then I took the key from my pocket and unlocked the door. "Come inside, there's something I want to show you." The interior was cool and shadowed, scented with cedar and salt air. Sunlight filtered through windows onto pine floors, polished by decades of bare feet. I led Vanessa to the living room where photographs lined the mantel. Thomas and me on our wedding day, Vanessa as a child building sandcastles, family gatherings on the deck. But it wasn't these I wanted her to see. I moved to a cabinet in the corner and opened it, revealing Thomas's architectural drawings. Blueprints, sketches, notes in his distinctive handwriting. "Your father kept everything," I said, drawing out a folder. "Every plan, every revision. This is Sandpiper Haven as he first imagined it before we were married." The sketch showed a much smaller structure, a simple beach cottage with 1 bedroom and an open porch. And this is what it became over the years. I laid out subsequent drawings, each showing how the villa had grown and evolved. A 2nd bedroom added when Vanessa was born, the porch enclosed to create a sunroom, a 3rd floor added with a widow's walk for storm watching. He built it in stages as our life together unfolded, I explained, each addition marking a new chapter, a new need or dream. Vanessa studied the drawings, her fingers tracing her father's handwriting in the margins. Notes about wind resistance, about the best angle for the roof to shed hurricane-force gusts, about reinforcements for the foundation against erosion. "It wasn't just a house to him," she said, understanding dawning in her voice. "It was a statement of belief, that things could last if they were built with care, that beauty and function could coexist." "Yes," I said, "and that's true of all the villas. Each one has its own story, its own purpose, within the larger vision." She looked up at me, eyes clear despite the tears gathering in them. I want to know those stories, Mom. All of them. I want to understand what Nathan tried to take from us. I touched her shoulder gently. What he failed to take, I corrected. And yes, I'll show you. We have time now. We spent the afternoon walking through Sandpiper Haven room by room. I shared memories of each space. The kitchen where Thomas had taught Vanessa to make pancakes shaped like starfish. The bedroom where she had recovered from chicken pox one summer. The study where Thomas had sketched plans for the villas that would follow this first one. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, we sat on the deck with tea I had brought in a thermos. The ritual continued even here. Mom, Vanessa said after a long silence, I'm so sorry for everything with Nathan, for not seeing what was happening, for letting him come between us. I covered her hand with mine. You have nothing to apologize for. You fell in love. You believed you were loved in return. There's no shame in that. But I should have trusted you. When you wouldn't sign the papers, I should have asked why instead of assuming you were being difficult. We all have blind spots when it comes to those we love, I said. I had them with Thomas too, especially in the early years. The important thing is that you're seeing clearly now. She nodded, looking out at the ocean. I've filed for separation, she said quietly. Not divorce yet, but I need space to think, to decide what comes next. Nathan's been calling constantly, alternating between apologies and accusations. What does your heart tell you? She was silent for a long moment. That I married a stranger. Someone who saw me as a means to an end, not as a person to build a life with. Her voice caught. I keep thinking about Dad, about how he built these places with such care, such intention. I want that kind of love, Mom. Not what Nathan offered. I squeezed her hand. Then you'll find it. Maybe not right away, but someday. As the sun touched the water, painting the waves gold and crimson, Vanessa turned to me with determination in her eyes. I want to help with the villas, she said. Learn how they work, what they need. Dad built them for us, for our family, our future. I want to be part of preserving that legacy. Joy bloomed in my chest, unexpected and warm. I'd like that very much. We left Sandpiper Haven as dusk was falling, locking the door behind us, each carrying memories both old and newly formed. The fortress that Thomas had built wasn't just holding firm. It was beginning to feel like home again, not just to me, but to Vanessa as well. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the villa standing against the darkening sky windows, glowing with the last light of day. Thomas's vision enduring, our story continuing. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to my life. Vanessa and I visited each of the villas in turn, from Myrtle Beach down to Hilton Head. At each one, I shared the story of its creation, its purpose, its place in Thomas's overall vision. And at each one, Vanessa absorbed not just facts and figures, but the underlying philosophy that had guided her father. Blue Heron Point, where she had taken her first steps, now housed a family of 5 who returned each summer to build memories of their own. She met them, listened to their stories of how the space had become part of their family tradition. Stormwatch, built to withstand hurricanes, had sheltered 3 neighboring families during the last major storm when evacuation wasn't possible. Its reinforced walls and self-sufficient power system had kept them safe until help arrived. Sea Glass Cottage, Thomas's final creation, stood proudly at the southernmost point of our properties. Its 3 stories rose from the dunes like a lighthouse, windows capturing both sunrise and sunset. This was where Reynolds and Nathan had focused their efforts, seeing its potential as an expansion of their resort project. It was here that Vanessa lingered longest, walking through rooms designed with a master's touch, studying the way light and shadow played across the spaces. This is where Dad put everything he knew, she said, standing on the 3rd-floor balcony overlooking the ocean. All his skill, all his philosophy about building. Yes, I agreed. He told me once that if I ever needed to remember what mattered, I should come here. I didn't understand then, but I think I do now. She turned to me, a question in her eyes. What did he mean? I gestured at the vista before us. Ocean meeting sky, dunes flowing into beach, the whole landscape in perfect balance. That life is like architecture. It needs a strong foundation, room to grow, protection against storms, and spaces for both solitude and togetherness. But most of all, it needs beauty. Not as decoration, but as purpose. Vanessa nodded, understanding dawning in her expression. That's what Nathan and Victor could never see. They looked at these places and saw only dollar signs. They missed the actual value. Many people do, I said. It's easier to calculate worth in numbers than in meaning. As we left Seaglass Cottage that day, Vanessa paused at the door. Mom, I want to learn everything. How to maintain these places, how to manage the trust, how to preserve Dad's vision. Will you teach me? The question filled me with quiet joy. Of course. That's what Thomas would have wanted. Over the following days, I introduced Vanessa to William, to the property managers Thomas had hired years ago, to the maintenance crews who kept the villas in perfect condition. She took notes, asked questions, absorbed information with the same focused intensity her father had shown when planning a new project. Henry joined us, often sharing stories of the early days when he had helped Thomas build the first villas before the sea called him north. His perspective added depth to Vanessa's understanding, showing her how her father's vision had evolved over time. Thomas wasn't born knowing how to build these places, Henry told her as we walked the beach one evening. He learned by doing, by making mistakes, by starting over when necessary. The important thing was that he never lost sight of his purpose. Which was, Vanessa prompted. Henry smiled, the resemblance to Thomas briefly striking. To create something that would outlast him. Something that combined beauty and strength in equal measure. Something that would shelter people, not just house them. I watched Vanessa absorb these words, saw recognition in her eyes. She was beginning to see her father not just as dad, but as a man with vision, with principles, with a legacy worth protecting. One afternoon, as we were reviewing rental agreements at my kitchen table, William called with news. "Eleanor," he said, his voice tense, "Reynolds has made a new move. He's approaching the families who rent the villas regularly, offering them incentives to support a rezoning petition for the entire coastline." My hand tightened around the phone. What kind of incentives? Guaranteed spots in his new resort development, discounted rates, exclusive access to amenities. He's trying to build support from within to make it look like the community favors development. I glanced at Vanessa, who was watching me with concern. "Has anyone agreed?" "Not that we know of," William said, "but it's a clever strategy. If he can get enough support, he could pressure the county commission regardless of who owns the properties." After I hung up, I explained the situation to Vanessa. Her expression hardened. "He doesn't give up, does he?" she said. "Even after the court hearing, even after being exposed." "Men like Reynolds don't accept defeat easily," I said, "especially when millions are at stake." She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she straightened determination in her posture. "We need to counter this directly," she said, "not just legally, but through the community. Dad built relationships with these families over decades. We need to remind them what they're really being asked to give up." "What do you have in mind?" A spark lit in her eyes, so like Thomas when he was planning a new project. "A gathering at Seaglass Cottage. Invite all the families who've rented the villas over the years. Let them share their stories, their memories. Show them what Reynolds development would destroy." I smiled, pride warming my chest. That's exactly what Thomas would have done. The planning began immediately. Henry reached out to the long-time renters, explaining the situation and inviting them to Seaglass Cottage for what we called a legacy gathering. Sophia helped organize refreshments and logistics. William prepared information about Reynolds' rezoning petition and its potential impact. And Vanessa, to my surprise and joy, took charge of the entire effort. She created a presentation showing before and after images of other coastal areas where similar developments had changed the character of the community. She gathered photographs from families showing decades of memories made at the villas. She even created a detailed model showing how Reynolds' resort would dominate the natural landscape. The day of the gathering arrived bright and clear, the October air crisp with autumn. Seaglass Cottage had been transformed. The great room arranged for presentations, the decks set up for conversations, photographs and memories displayed throughout the space. People began arriving by mid-morning, families who had spent summers in the villas for years, sometimes decades. They greeted me with the warmth of old friends, many sharing stories of Thomas, how he had fixed a leaking roof during a midnight storm, how he had built a special ramp for a child with mobility issues, how he had remembered every family member's name, year after year. As the gathering grew, I felt Thomas's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not as grief or absence, but as continuation. His vision lived in these relationships, these shared experiences, these spaces that had become part of so many stories beyond our own. Vanessa moved through the crowd with grace and purpose, listening to each family's memories, connecting people with similar experiences, building community as surely as Thomas had built structures. When everyone had arrived, nearly 100 people filling the cottage and spilling onto the decks, Vanessa called for attention. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows with the ocean as her backdrop, she looked poised and confident, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you all for coming today," she began. "Many of you knew my father, Thomas Blackwell. You knew him as the builder of these villas, as the man who fixed things when they broke, as someone who cared about creating spaces where your families could gather and grow." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. What you might not know is the vision that drove him. My father believed that this coastline was special, that it deserved protection, that development should enhance natural beauty rather than overwhelm it. The villas you've come to love are the physical expression of that belief. She gestured to the display board showing Reynolds' proposed resort. Now that vision is threatened. Victor Reynolds wants to transform this entire stretch of coast into a massive resort complex. The villas would be demolished, the natural dunes flattened. The character of this place, its peace, its connection to nature, its human scale, would be lost forever. A concerned rumble passed through the gathering. Several people moved closer to examine the resort plans. "Some of you have been approached by Mr. Reynolds," Vanessa continued. "He's offered incentives, special deals, privileged access to his new development. Those offers might seem attractive, but I ask you to consider what would really be lost. Not just buildings, but a way of experiencing this coastline that can never be replaced." She paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with each person. "My father built these villas one at a time, each with its own character, its own relationship to the landscape. He knew your families, your preferences, your traditions. What Reynolds offers is standardization. Luxury, perhaps, but without soul, without history, without the uniqueness that makes these places special." An older man stood up from his chair, leaning on a cane. I recognized him as Dr. Martin, who had brought his family to Stormwatch every summer for 25 years. "I met your father after Hurricane Hugo," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "Our regular rental had been destroyed, and we thought our family tradition was ended. Thomas not only found room for us at Stormwatch, but he remembered that my youngest daughter collected seashells. He had gathered a bucket of perfect specimens and left them on the porch with a note saying the hurricane had delivered special treasures. That girl is 37 now, and she still has those shells." Murmurs of recognition spread through the crowd. Others began to share their stories of how Thomas had remembered birthdays, accommodated special needs, created custom features for long-term renters. A woman with silver hair spoke next. "When my husband was diagnosed with ALS, we thought we'd never return to Blue Heron Point. Thomas renovated the entire first floor to make it accessible, added a ramp to the beach, installed special equipment in the bathroom. He did it over the winter and only charged us the regular rate the following summer. My husband spent his last good years watching the ocean from that porch." Story after story emerged, painting a picture of a man who saw his buildings not just as rental properties, but as settings for human lives, for meaningful experiences, for memories that would outlast the structures themselves. As the sharing continued, I watched Vanessa's face. She was hearing dimensions of her father she had never fully understood, not just as dad, but as a man whose work had touched countless lives in ways both large and small. When the stories finally ebbed, Vanessa stepped forward again. "This is the legacy we're fighting to preserve. Not just buildings, but a philosophy of care, of attention to individual needs, of respect for both human and natural environments." She gestured to the legal documents William had prepared. "We've created a petition opposing Reynolds' rezoning effort. But more importantly, we're establishing the Thomas Blackwell Coastal Heritage Association, a formal organization dedicated to preserving not just the villas, but the entire approach to coastal living that they represent." The response was immediate and overwhelming. People lined up to sign the petition, to join the association, to offer their support in whatever way they could. Many approached me directly, sharing more memories of Thomas, expressing gratitude for what we were trying to protect. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the gathering took on the feeling of a celebration rather than a strategy session. Food was shared, stories continued to flow, children played on the beach below, while adults conversed on the decks. I found a quiet moment to stand alone at the railing, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and rose. The brass key was warm in my pocket, a familiar weight that now felt shared, its burden lightened by community, by purpose, by the knowledge that Thomas's vision would continue. Vanessa joined me, slipping her arm through mine. "You okay, Mom?" I nodded, too full of emotion for words just then. "I never really understood before," she said softly, gazing out at the ocean. "What Dad was building and why it mattered so much to him. I saw the villas as just buildings, just assets, but there's so much more." "Yes," I managed. "They're containers for life, for connection, for meaning." She squeezed my arm gently. "Thank you for fighting for them, for not signing those papers even when I pressured you to." I turned to look at her, this daughter who had found her way back to understanding. "Thank you for being open to seeing the truth even when it was painful." As darkness fell and people began to depart, each thanking us, promising support, affirming commitment to the cause, I felt something shift within me. The fortress Thomas had built was no longer just a defense. It had become a gathering place, a community, a living legacy that would extend far beyond his life or mine. The brass key in my pocket was no longer just a burden to carry. It was a trust to share, to pass on, to honor through action, rather than mere preservation. That night, as Vanessa and I drove back to my house, the coastal road winding between dunes and sea, she spoke of plans for the Association for Educational Programs, about sustainable coastal development for archiving Thomas's architectural drawings and philosophy. "We could establish a scholarship," she suggested, "for architecture students who focus on environmentally sensitive design, in Dad's name." "He would love that," I said, heart full to overflowing. At home, we sat on this porch with tea, the autumn night cool around us. 2 cups, both filled now. The second no longer just for memory, but for presence, for continuation. "What about Nathan?" I asked gently. "Have you decided what to do?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around her cup. "I've filed for divorce," she said finally. "There's no rebuilding trust after what he did, what he tried to do." I nodded, understanding. Some breaches couldn't be repaired. "And Reynolds?" I asked. "His petition will fail," she said with quiet confidence. "The community is united against it. The county commission won't approve rezoning in the face of such opposition. His resort dreams are over, at least for this stretch of coastline." We sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear above the trees, listening to night sounds. Crickets, distant waves, the occasional car passing. "Mom," Vanessa said after a while, "I'd like to move into Sandpiper Haven for a while. To regroup, to learn about the villas, to feel close to Dad again." "I think that would be perfect," I replied. "It's where everything began. It's a good place to begin again." The following Sunday brought an unexpected visit. Henry's truck pulled into my driveway early in the morning, followed by Sophia's sedan. They emerged carrying baskets and coolers, smiling as they mounted the porch steps. "We thought you might be ready for some company," Sophia said, holding up a basket that smelled of freshly baked bread. Henry nodded, lifting a cooler. "And a proper celebration." Inside, they unpacked their offerings. Sophia's cornbread and honey-fresh fish. Henry had caught that morning vegetables from someone's garden. As they bustled around my kitchen, the house filled with conversation, with laughter, with the sounds of life being shared rather than merely endured. More cars arrived. William and his wife Ruth from the church group, 3 families who had attended the gathering in its Seaglass cottage. Each brought food stories, warmth. By noon, my house overflowed with people. The dining room table had been extended with card tables borrowed from neighbors. Children played in the yard, adults gathered in conversational clusters, and through it all ran a current of celebration, of community, of shared purpose. Vanessa arrived last, having spent the morning at Sandpiper Haven preparing it for her temporary residence. She carried a framed photograph I hadn't seen before. Thomas standing on the deck of Seaglass Cottage, arms spread wide as if embracing the ocean view, face alight with satisfaction at a vision realized. She placed it on the mantel, adjusting it carefully so the light fell properly on her father's face. Then she turned to the gathered company, raising her glass in a toast. "To my father, Thomas Blackwell," she said, her voice clear and steady, "who built not just houses, but homes, who saw beauty in strength and strength in beauty, who created a legacy that will endure because it was built on principles, not just profit." To Thomas, the room echoed, glasses lifting. "And to Eleanor," Henry added, turning to me with a smile, who had the courage to stand firm when pressured to protect what mattered, to keep the fortress intact until the storm had passed. To Eleanor, came the chorus again. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not grief. I raised my own glass. And to all of you, I said, who reminded me that the strongest walls are built of community, of shared purpose, of mutual respect. Thomas would be honored to see his vision carried forward by so many hands. As the gathering continued into the afternoon, I found a quiet moment to step onto the porch. The roses were fading now, autumn stealing their blooms, but their stems stood firm against the trellis Thomas had built. I touched the brass key in my pocket, its familiar weight a comfort rather than a burden. Thomas had entrusted me with his legacy, but he had never meant for me to carry it alone. He had built a fortress, yes, but fortresses were meant to shelter communities, not just individuals. The door opened behind me and Vanessa stepped out. She stood beside me, her shoulder touching mine, both of us gazing at the garden, where life retreated, now only to return in spring. I was thinking, she said, about what you told me at Sea Glass Cottage. That Dad said if you ever needed to remember what mattered, you should go there. I nodded, remembering. I understand it now, she continued. He wasn't just talking about the building itself. He was talking about the perspective it gives you, seeing the whole coastline, understanding how each part relates to the whole, appreciating both the details and the bigger picture. Yes, I said softly. That sounds like Thomas. I want that perspective, Mom. Not just for the villas, but for life. I want to build something that lasts, that matters, that serves a purpose beyond myself. I turned to look at my daughter, seeing in her face the same determination that had driven Thomas, the same clarity of vision, the same commitment to principles over expediency. You already are, I told her, every day. Inside the house, voices rose in laughter, life continued, relationships strengthened, community formed and reformed around shared values, shared memories, shared purpose. Thomas's legacy wasn't just in the buildings he had created, but in the lives he had touched, the values he had demonstrated, the vision he had articulated through both words and actions. That legacy now lived on, not just preserved, but growing, evolving, finding new expression through Vanessa, through the association, through all those who understood what the houses of wind and salt truly represented. The brass key in my pocket would always be a reminder of Thomas, of his last urgent instructions, of the fortresses he had built to protect what mattered. But it was no longer a solitary burden. It was a shared trust, a continuation, a bridge between past and future. As Vanessa and I returned to the gathering inside, I felt Thomas's presence not as absence or loss, but as foundation. Solid, enduring, supporting whatever might be built upon it. The fortress held not just through legal documents or judicial rulings, but through community, through shared purpose, through lives intertwined and strengthened by common values. I had kept my promise. I had not signed away the legacy he entrusted to me. I had stood firm at the threshold, refusing to cross the line that would have erased both his vision and my autonomy. And in that standing, something new had emerged. Not just preservation of the past, but creation of a future worthy of what had come before. As evening fell and our guests began to depart, each leaving with warm embraces and promises to return, I found myself at the kitchen table with Sophia and Vanessa. 2 cups had become 3, the ritual expanding to include new presence, new life. What now? Sophia asked, pragmatic as always. Vanessa smiled, her eyes clear and determined. Now we build. Not walls, but bridges. Not just preservation, but evolution. We honor Dad's vision by extending it, by adapting it to new challenges, by ensuring it remains relevant and vital. I nodded, feeling the rightness of her words. Thomas had never been content with mere maintenance. He had always been looking forward, imagining how spaces might better serve the people who inhabited them, how beauty and function might be more perfectly integrated. He would be so proud of you, I told Vanessa, not just for protecting his legacy, but for understanding it deeply enough to carry it forward in your own way. Later, after everyone had gone and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, I stood at the window looking out at stars scattered across the dark sky. The brass key sat on the table beside me, catching the soft lamplight, its familiar contours a reminder of all it had protected, all it had preserved. I thought of Thomas's last urgent words to me, don't sign anything. One day you'll understand why. I understood now more deeply than I could have imagined. He hadn't just been protecting buildings or assets. He had been protecting a philosophy, a way of relating to the world, a vision of how life might be lived with integrity and purpose. By refusing to sign, I had kept that vision intact long enough for Vanessa to discover it for herself, for the community to rally around it, for the legacy to find new expression through new voices. I picked up the key, its weight familiar in my palm. Then in a gesture that felt both symbolic and deeply practical, I placed it on the table before Vanessa's empty chair. Tomorrow when she returned, I would tell her it was time to share not just the knowledge of the villas, not just the management of the trust, but the key itself, the responsibility, the authority, the honor of continuing what Thomas had begun. Not because I was stepping aside, but because true legacy isn't transferred in a single moment. It's shared gradually, intentionally, with those who understand its value and commit to its continuation. As I prepared for bed, setting out clothes for the morning, planning a visit to Sandpiper Haven to help Vanessa settle in, I felt a peace I hadn't known since Thomas's death. Not the absence of grief, but its transformation into something productive, meaningful, forward-looking. The fortress held, not just through walls and documents, but through shared purpose, through community, through the passing of knowledge and values from one generation to the next. Thomas had built for the future. And now that future was unfolding not exactly as he might have envisioned it, but true to the principles that had guided his work, his life, our life together. I whispered to his memory, to the night air, to whatever might be listening, the line held Thomas, and what stands beyond it is beautiful.